Welcome to today's webinar on managing sales opportunities. And thank you to all of you who are attending, whether the live event or on demand. I'm Steve Bistritz, author of the best-selling sales book, Selling to the C-Suite. If you have questions, please enter them into the question box, and I'll try to answer them at the end of today's session. On the screen now, you'll see my contact information displayed. Just a little bit about me. I spent 28 years with IBM as a salesperson, sales manager, and in numerous other positions with IBM, including manager of a sales training department for a billion-dollar division. Then I became vice president of product marketing and development for a small sales training company in Atlanta before starting my own sales training company and consulting company in 2002. And now I focus mainly on workshops on selling to executives and on managing sales opportunities and in consulting with and coaching individual salespeople. My major focus over the past 30 years or so has been on two specific areas, namely selling to senior executives and on helping salespeople do a better job of managing their sales opportunities. My major objective today is to discuss opportunity management, why it's so important to qualify sales opportunities quickly and efficiently through a repetitive, proven process. And to do that, I'll take you through my solution approach to that process, called Sales Opportunity Snapshot, or SOS. And as we begin, I'd like you to think back to your days as a salesperson and think about the one salesperson who was always at the top of the ranking charts each quarter. Think about what made that salesperson stand out amongst all others. Because from my experience, the one thing that the most proficient salespeople instinctively and intuitively do on a consistent basis is to focus on the right deals. They seem to have their own built-in qualification system for accurately and effectively assessing their sales opportunities. They don't chase every deal that's placed in front of them. However, that's clearly not a skill that every salesperson possesses. Objectively qualifying sales opportunities can be a difficult task, particularly if the approach to that qualification process is inconsistent or unstructured. That's where a structured, repetitive approach to opportunity management can help. So let's get started. So what we're going to talk about today is Sales Opportunity Snapshot and why manage sales opportunities. Why go through that process? Well, let's say today you are closing perhaps 3 out of 10 deals. In other words, your close rate is about 30% of the deals placed in front of you. How would you like to double that closing percentage and go from closing 3 out of 10 deals to closing 4 out of 7, 55% close rate? And what the focus here is on the 7. Okay, how did I get to 7? Well, basically, when I started with 10 opportunities, I looked at them and I saw that 3 of those opportunities I could not win. Those were predestined for my competitors, if you will, or perhaps deals I didn't even want to get involved in, all right? So if you can qualify out some of those deals and focus on the ones you think you can win and have the best chance of winning, you will increase your close rate. But you have to do that through a structured process. So what I'm going to be talking about is something called Sales Opportunity Snapshot, but you can apply this approach in your sales campaigns, in your sales opportunity. And you'll see it's a practical approach to managing your sales opportunities, analyzing them effectively and managing them more effectively so that you close more deals. That's what we're all about. So let's talk about some of the outcomes that you can get if you use this process, okay? First of all, you'll be able to quickly qualify those sales opportunities using what I call an opportunity snapshot assessment approach. And I'm going to take you through that process, and I'll have a handout that you can send for that will give you that approach in a hard copy and paper approach, but you can utilize that effectively. And what I want you to do is to internalize this process. Secondly, you'll be able to communicate the status of each of those sales opportunities to others in your organization, your sales management, and the extended team that you're working with. Thirdly, you'll be able to use the concepts of what I call influence and power to identify the key players that are associated with your sales opportunity. One of the first things you have to do in your opportunity is identify what I call the relevant executive for that opportunity. And we'll talk about that a little bit later and how you go about doing that. But when you identify that relevant executive, you'll find out that that executive has an element of influence and power over the sales opportunity that you're pursuing. Then how do you put in place the right sales strategy so that you can close the opportunity that you're pursuing? And then lastly, we'll talk about how you put some meaningful actions in place to win each of those deals. So again, the process that I'm going to be talking about is very simple. It provides salespeople with a perspective of their sales campaign. So again, they can decide to either pursue or disengage from that opportunity. And we talked a little bit at the front end of today's webinar about why disengaging is so important. To go after the deals that you have the best chance of winning. That's what the top of the charts salespeople do. Secondly, you'll be able to communicate the status of your sales campaign to others in your organization. You'll be able to show them what information is missing and perhaps what information you need to gain in order to close the deal. And you can share that with others in your organization. And you can do this by a simple process that I'm going to show you in just a few minutes. So let's talk about what this process is about, because it's a multi-step process. Starts with looking at that opportunity, so doing some initial analysis. Because the first thing you're going to want to do again is qualify that opportunity. Go through what I call an opportunity management process in terms of opportunity qualification. And you'll see that it's a very simple process, but I want you to internalize it, to think about it for each of the opportunities you're pursuing. And then you'll have to, what I call, align with the political landscape. Look at the players in the organization and see who's the most powerful player. And you'll see why that's important in just a minute or two. Then you'll be able to set your competitive strategy. And we'll talk about the 3 different strategies you could implement in each of your sales campaigns. Lastly, we'll be talking about how you develop a value proposition and the key elements of that value proposition that you can easily put in place, and then the meaningful actions that you need to implement in order to close the deal. And then finally, after all that is said and done, you're going to want to test and review that sales campaign on a continual basis until it closes, so you know where you are in the sales campaign and what you need to be doing. So we're going to talk first about qualifying the opportunity. And what I tell salespeople around the world is, for any sales opportunity that you're pursuing, I don't care if it's a transaction or a complex deal, multi-million-dollar campaign or a $50,000 campaign, there are 3 compelling questions that you need to ask at multiple times in the sales campaign. The first of those questions is, should we pursue this opportunity? Okay? And again, we want to go from closing 3 out of 10 to 4 out of 7. We want to have you double your close rate, whatever it is today. And the first compelling question, should we pursue the opportunity, the underlying question there and criteria there is, what's changing in the client environment that's creating the need for your solution? What's happening in the client environment? And today's environment alone, the pandemic, okay, there are multiple things that are changing in the client environment that could create the need for your solution, could create an opportunity for you. The second compelling question is, can we effectively compete for this opportunity? Do we have a solution that can be integrated into the client environment, and can we articulate the specific value of our solution to the client executive? And that is so important. Do you have a solution that can be integrated in the client environment, and can you articulate the specific business value of your solution? And thirdly, can you reasonably expect to win the opportunity? Are you aligned with the most powerful people in the client organization who can help you win the deal? Now, I think you would agree that you should be asking those kinds of questions for each of your sales campaigns and doing it at multiple times. When you start a sales campaign, in the middle of the campaign, and even as you go to close it, just before you close it. So let's look at, in some more detail, at each of those compelling questions. And to do that, I'm going to use the metric or the methodology of looking at a bullseye or target, okay? So that first compelling question is, should we pursue this opportunity? And you're going to see with each of these three compelling questions, there's three underlying criteria associated with each compelling question. And I'm going to show you how they appear on this chart. The first is your opportunity aligned with some key client business initiative? Hopefully it is, because if it is, you've got a better chance of pursuing it and closing it. Secondly, what's the client's ability to fund the project? Do they have funds earmarked for this particular project or application, or do they have access to discretionary funds? And thirdly, what's the client's driving reason to change? What's changing in that client environment that's creating the need for your solution? And you're going to see as we go through this process that not all of those three criteria are created equal. The criteria that's nearest the center of the bullseye is most important. So in this particular view for this question, should we pursue this opportunity, the client's driving to reason to change is the most important. Okay? As we look at the second compelling question, it is, can we compete for this opportunity? And the three criteria we have associated here is what's the viability of our solution as viewed from the client's perspective? How does the client view the viability of our solution? Secondly, what are the sales and implementation resources required, from your company or perhaps even your company and business partners to implement the solution? And criteria number 6 is, what's the specific business value of our solution? Again, the most important one right here, the specific business value. And have you articulated that? Have you confirmed that with the client executive? And does the client executive agree to that? So let's go to the third compelling question. Can we reasonably expect to win? Criteria number 7 is, what's our ability to impact the client decision process? Can we impact both or either the formal or the informal decision criteria? 8, what's the executive credibility and support? What level of executive credibility and support do we have for this opportunity? And criteria number 9, and probably the most important of any of the criteria, certainly within this 3, is, are we aligned with the relevant executive for the sales opportunity? And I'll define that and describe that in just a minute. So those are the 9 criteria, again, within each of these 3 compelling questions, right? And that's what the snapshot looks like in its entirety. And that's what I just went through. Again, 3 compelling questions and 3 criteria within each of those compelling questions. And how you approach the opportunity, how you fill in that snapshot will tell you if you have a good prospect of closing this particular deal. So let's talk about now how you define whether it's a good criteria or bad criteria. Do you assume it as positive or negative, each of those 9 criteria? And what I'm going to ask you to do is to review each of those 9 criteria, okay? Every one of them, and rate it as favorable. Each one is favorable only if both of the following conditions are met. The criteria information is known and comes from a flawless source within the client organization. Someone in the client organization has told you or given you this information about that criteria, that specific criteria. And next, the information is then positive and favorable. Then you can rate that criteria as positive. So if you look at a snapshot, and here's an example of one, and here's an activity that we give the teams to do when we're doing a workshop. We say, analyze this opportunity snapshot. And just from what I just described to you, you can see right away, number 1, 3, 6, and 9, the criteria nearest the center of the circle, none of those are identified as positive. None of those are colored in, if you will. Okay? The ones that are colored in are criteria 1, 2, 5, and 8. So what is criteria 1? Again, it's the client's business initiative. What's number 2? The client's ability to fund the project, okay, etc. So as you go through each opportunity, you create a snapshot that looks something like this. And if you were at the beginning of a sales campaign, this might be an acceptable snapshot. If you think you're near the end of a sales campaign and you still have this snapshot, your chances of closing the deal are probably pretty slim, and perhaps it's a time where you should disengage. So do you see how you could use the snapshot then as criteria for whether you should pursue or disengage from a particular sales opportunity? And that's how you go from 10 deals down to 7, to really kind of refining the deals that are in your funnel and seeing which ones now that you have the best opportunity to close. And when you do that, you focus on the deals that you have the best chance of winning, your chances of closing those deals go up significantly, okay? So that's what we're going to use the snapshot for. And if you look at a page of my opportunity sales opportunity plan, if you will, the first page looks like this. It has these snapshots on it, and this is for a single opportunity. And you can see that the snapshot changes over time, okay? And some criteria may fall out. You may get other information about additional criteria. For example, if you look closely at this one, you can't probably see this on your screen, but you now have an opportunity here where criteria 1, 2, and 3 are all filled in. You might have a better chance of winning this deal. Things may change, but there's a client's driving reason to change identified within the snapshot, and you can see that. And what I'm going to do is, and you're going to see this toward the end of today's session, you'll see another screen that looks like this, but I'll give you a copy of what I call the qualification screener that has those 3 compelling questions and the 9 criteria. It's a hard copy PDF. You'll be able to get that if you send me an email and simply place SOS handouts in the subject line. I'll tell you this again toward the end of the session. So if you didn't catch that right now, I'll talk about it again at the end of the session. But I'm going to move on now to looking at the political landscape, the people of influence and power within that client organization who can help you close this deal. So the first thing we're going to do is start defining that relevant executive. And how do you identify the relevant executive? Very simply, my definition of the relevant executive is the executive who stands to gain the most or lose the most as a result of the outcome of the project or application that's associated with your sales opportunity. Now think about that for just a minute. The executive who stands to gain the most or lose the most as a result of the outcome of the project or application that's associated with your sales opportunity. So you, in effect, have to sit on the other side of the desk and view your sales opportunity from the client's perspective. So that relevant executive is the executive you need to both identify and align with if you want to close the deal. The executive you need to identify and align with if you want to close the deal. Now let's talk about the differences between authority and influence. If you look at the traditional organization chart, authority is given to you by your rank on the organization chart. Players A, B, and C on this chart have equal authority given to them by their rank on the organization chart. Now, if you said, okay, what level of influence does each of those people have, the chart may look considerably different. Player B may have the most influence. You may have player D on there who's not on the organization chart, but that person may have a significant level of influence. You may also have someone outside the organization. In effect, this player E that you see here is outside the organization. That person can have a level of influence and power over the sales opportunity. So what we're going to do is we're going to create what I call an influence map, where the center of power is in the middle there. It's the blue area. Then you have a green area, which has people of less influence. And then you have the people in the outside rim that have the lowest level of influence, okay? So, again, inside that center of power, the most influence. In the yellow area, the people of least influence. And we're going to put players on that map, okay, so that you see as you pursue your opportunity, and you could create this hand-drawn map. You can create this, I have a program that comes with this in my workshop. There's a software tool that helps you do this. But you can do the same thing on a piece of paper. And what you want to do is you want to create these little title blocks, for example, and you might, in the title blocks I have, I identify, what that player's role is in the buying process. I say what our relationship is with that particular player, and also, what's our level of past contact. I also can say, okay, this is a player I need to meet. I know I need to meet this person. I haven't met this individual yet, and perhaps my access to this player has been blocked. So I want to put all that information on these little title blocks that I might put on my influence map. Again, I have a software tool that creates that, but that's neither here nor there. You can look at this and do the same thing I'm showing you and internalize this process. Now let's look at what I call the building blocks of influence. How do I define influence? How do I identify some of those players? Well, you have to look at, what are the capabilities of the individual? How has this executive contributed to the success of the organization? Secondly, you have to look at what kind of connections these people have. Who are they connected to in the client organization? That shows you how much influence they have also. Thirdly, it's the vision that this particular executive creates for either the department or for the organization as a whole. And lastly, what level of value has this executive contributed? And when you put those all together, you have people of influence. And those people have the power and the influence. And you can look at this on a deal-by-deal basis to identify these people who are the most important in that client organization. So that will help you get towards identifying that relevant executive. And when you put all these people on this influence map, you see a typical one laid out here. Different executives, you can see they're in different areas. And you can see that person in blue there. His name is Benjamin Wu. He happens to be the CFO of this organization. He is the most influential person. He's in that center of power, if you will. And you can see players who are outside in the yellow area, but still have a level of influence that might help you if you're calling on some of those players. And you could take this one step further and say, okay, who influences who in this organization? How are they connected? And again, you can map that out very simply with this, what I call the lines of influence. Okay? So you create your influence map. That's what I call page 2 of that opportunity plan. I'm going to talk now about how you select a competitive sales strategy for the particular opportunity that you're pursuing. And I have and defined in my little workshop 3 different sales strategies. And I'll tell you what these are and how you can start identifying these. I call them direct, alter, and segment. Okay? Well, here's an example. Here's a direct strategy. Direct strategy, it's what I call a frontal approach, where the client thinks that you have superiority in your solution or your company. And you've dealt with this client perhaps before. They know you. They know your capabilities. So that will help you as you move forward in pursuing this opportunity. But let me tell you some of the criteria that's associated with a direct strategy. You have to have a clear and unique solution fit. You perhaps have a previous relationship with this particular client. You're the first on the scene. You're the first one they told about for this particular opportunity. They want to move forward very quickly, so they want to make the decision to implement this application or project very quickly. And lastly, they want to implement it quickly. So that in that case, you actually use what I call a direct strategy or a frontal approach. Okay? Now here's how you develop your strategies. Okay? That direct approach, you can use that when your solution completely addresses the client's buying criteria, and you can differentiate your value from that of your competitors. And I'm going to take you through the value proposition process in just a few minutes. Secondly, use that, what I call an alter strategy. You may have to change your approach, okay? If the client has already been dealing with another competitor, for example, and they have identified a solution that provides what they think is the best value, or if the client's buying criteria is not completely addressed by your solution, you may have to alter your approach a little bit. And the third approach is what I call a segment approach, where you can only address a portion of the client's buying criteria. So you may go after just a piece of that opportunity with one of your solutions. So let's talk about the steps to setting your strategy, okay? The first step is to analyze the client's business initiative and the buying criteria that's associated with it, and which executive established that criteria. That will also help you identify that relevant executive. Secondly, you want to look at what your competitors are for this particular opportunity and look at their strengths and weaknesses, and then look at the strengths and weaknesses of your own solution. And you've got to be very candid about that analysis. You've got to be very realistic about that particular analysis. And the third step then is to determine if your competitors have revealed this strategy by similar past opportunities where you've encountered those competitors. You've worked against this competitor before. What kind of strategy did they use? How did they approach the client? And then you can absolutely set your strategy by addressing the points we talked about in steps 1, 2, and 3. So this is the process you go about in order to set your sales strategy. And in my case, I have an opportunity plan. This is page 3 of a 3-page opportunity plan where I talk about this strategy. What does my company look like? What are the strengths and weaknesses of my solution? Look at my competitors. What are the strengths and weaknesses of their solution? And then what strategy will you implement? In the middle section of this opportunity plan page, I define my value proposition. And you'll see how I'm going to describe that in just a minute. And the last thing we do is then talk about the actions we're going to put in place. Those actions should complement the strategy that we selected. Okay? So let's talk about the value proposition piece, because this is a very important piece of the process, the value proposition, how you set your value proposition, how you describe and define your value proposition to the client executive, okay? Extremely important. So let's talk about that value proposition and what I call the 3 components of value. And here's a key takeaway from today's session, a key takeaway. This is a chart you want to focus on. The relevant executive chart was another key takeaway, and the third key takeaway was the opportunity snapshot, the 9 criteria and the 3 compelling questions on it, okay? But let's talk about now the 3 components of value. Most salespeople go in only talking about the value of their solution. And I would attest to you that that's only one of the 3 components that you bring. The first component is you personally, your personal value, the background and experience that you have in dealing with other customers of the same type. You've solved this problem before. You've applied this solution before. You can help the client tremendously. So your personal value is extremely important, and don't sell it short. Again, your personal value is so important. Secondly, is the value that your company brings, your company's resources. They are perhaps tremendous, and you can describe them. They are a key component of your value that you bring to the client organization. And then thirdly and lastly is the value of your solution. Now, again, as I said before, most salespeople only focus on that third component, the value of your company's solution. And what do you do when you do that? You commoditize your solution, all right? But if you look at these 3 components of value, if you can describe them to the customer executive, those 3 elements of value differentiate you from your competitors. This provides the level of differentiation. And again, so that your solution does not become commoditized. So let's take this in a little bit more detail then. So in creating a value proposition, what do you have to do? Again, I talked to you about the first thing you have to do is look at the client's initiative. And perhaps it's what I call a breakthrough initiative, something that will put that company ahead of their competitors, all right? So again, you have to look at the client's business initiative first. And then you take those 3 components of value that I just talked about, and the overlap of those 2 things you can then articulate your specific business value. And this will differentiate you from your competitor. But again, you have to know what business initiative this particular application or project is addressing. So when you're looking at creating a value proposition, the key elements are, number 1, you have to address the client's issues first, okay? How does it relate to payback on a key client business initiative? So what's important to the client? That's number 1. The second thing is, how can you create value for them? And that's in those 3 elements of value that I talked about a minute ago. And lastly, then how can you demonstrate your capability? Can you give the client executive an example of how you addressed a similar problem at another company and solved that problem and created value for that other customer? That is so important because then, okay, you've got your proof statement satisfied, okay? They know then that you can deliver value to them. And client executives will take calculated risks when they see the value that's coming to them, all right? So you've got to focus on value and presenting the value of your solution to the customer. And the other thing is, once you deliver your solution, if you get the deal, you win the deal, make sure that you go back to the client executive and articulate to them the value that your solution delivered to them. Why is that? Because you want them to come back to you when they find another opportunity where you can help them later on down the road. So communicating your value is so important to the client executive. Make sure you go back to that executive and communicate your value. Now let's talk about some other elements of when you create that value proposition. Here's some questions you have to ask. Will your executive, or does the executive, perceive that your solution offers value to them and offers competitive advantage to them? Can you clearly differentiate the value of your solution from those of your competitors? And I told you, the only way you can do that is through those three elements of value. No other competitor has exactly those elements of value. They may have a similar solution. They don't have your experience. They don't have the value of your company's resources behind them. And thirdly, are you able to quantify that value using their metrics? Can you quantify to them the specific business value that your solution will bring to them? And is your value proposition provocative and compelling? Does it drive the customer to a solution? When they see your value proposition, do they say, okay, yeah, we have to implement this. Look how much value it delivers to us. So that's the last part of the question. Does the value proposition create a sense of urgency for the client executive? Now, here's an example of a customer-focused value proposition. Now, this is at the opportunity level. Okay? Again, this is not a general kind of value proposition that your marketing department can provide. And I'm going to populate this chart here and show you that these two statements taken together are extremely powerful, but somewhat difficult to construct. This is not easy. It's not easy to construct this value proposition. You have to sit down with somebody in the client organization, get their help to help you create this value proposition. All right? Now, I'm going to give you an example here in just a second, but before I do that, let's take a look at this value proposition in a little bit more detail. You know, you should be capable of, and then you have to describe the impact your solution will have by monetary units or percent through the ability to do something, and you describe the new situation. And the second statement is this will require an investment of so much money. You state the cost of your solution, which will be returned within, and you have to then estimate the time frame for that return on that investment. So here's an example, okay? Pretty simple example. You can read it. You know, this is going to result in a savings of almost $6 million annually by implementing what's called their telepresence system. This investment is $5.3 million, which you can see will be returned within 11 months. This is kind of a slam dunk, right, if you will. All right? Who would not implement this solution? Because after that, everything after that, quote, is gravy, if you will, and affects the bottom line to this particular client. And you can see here their proof source. We implemented a similar solution at this other company who began achieving an annual savings of $7.5 million during the first year. So again, if you can provide them with an example of where you've done this before, it's so important. Now let's talk then, so that's your value proposition. Let's talk now about developing some of those actions, okay? And again, I'm going to use my format here just so you describe it and see the process. You'll have access to this PDF, so you'll be able to use this methodology, at least internalize it for you and your company if you wish, okay? Now, what needs to happen? You know, what's the specific action that needs to take place for this opportunity to close? Secondly, when will it happen? What's the time frame for this action to take place? Who will do it? Who in your company has the responsibility to implement this particular action? And then how will it help either strengthen our position in the sales campaign, obtain some missing information, or perhaps soften some of your weaknesses? So that's what you're looking to do when you develop each of these individual actions. Now, lastly, I'm going to talk about simply a testing process. And again, you can use and implement this testing process in your company. This is a straightforward process. And what I do is I have what I call opportunity owners and opportunity reviewers. The opportunity owners, obvious, those people who own the sales opportunity. Reviewers can be either their peers or it could be sales management, sales executives in the company. But here's the process they go through. The opportunity owner, in terms of validating the plan, the first thing they're going to do is present their plan, those 3 pages, and you can do a similar process within your company, use similar kinds of actions to implement this. You present your plan. The others just listen, okay, and then prepare some questions. And then you can ask questions, and the people who own the opportunity, they can clarify the plan. And then what you do is you set these people apart in separate rooms and have the opportunity owners think about and prepare and anticipate the challenges that you might present to them. You, the opportunity reviewer, might present to them. And then the reviewers do the same thing. They prepare in detail the kinds of suggestions they may have, because in the last part of the process, you want to improve the plan. So the people who presented it, the opportunity owners, they present their plans to improve the plan specifically, and then the reviewers come in and tell them any other things that they might have to improve the plan, any other ideas they might have. So you go through validate the plan, test the plan, improve the plan. You can implement this in your organization. So what does this process do? What are the outcomes of this process for sales managers, for example? If you use this process or this approach methodology that I just described, and you can implement this on your own, okay, you can, first of all, assess the status of each opportunity, okay? And I don't care if they're transactions or a complex sale. You look at them and review them in the same way I just described, and you look at each of the different opportunities. You can then take the salespeople through and say to them, okay, here are the questions I have about those opportunities. And maybe you can answer them, and you can make some decisions then about whether you should continue to pursue the opportunity or disengage from it. Thirdly, it improves the sales manager's ability to forecast deals with a higher level of confidence. You know, you see the status of each of those opportunities, and you say, yeah, okay, that's got a good percentage of closing. So it gives you more confidence as a sales manager. You can improve the close rates by having the salespeople focus on the deals that you think and they think they have the best chance of winning. Together, you make that decision. And then lastly, which opportunities do you want to really apply those precious resources to? So again, if you want that opportunity screener that I talked about, has more details about the 9 criteria within those 3 compelling questions. And I also have something called the Guide to Client Discovery, which will help you look at some of those opportunities, some of those clients, research them a little bit more before you make that critical call on the client executive. So again, just send it to me, Steve B. at sellexcel.com. You see my email address up there. Place the notation SOS Handouts in the subject line of that email, and I will send you the handouts that I just described. So I hope you receive value from today's webinar. I don't see anybody really posed any questions. If you have questions, put them in the question box right now before we close today. Again, if you would like these handouts, you have the process to use to get to me. If you'd like more information about the methodology that I described and how you could apply it within your organization, here is my contact information. There's my book, Selling to the C-Suite. It's now in the 2nd edition. It's been really doing very well. And if you have any questions, just let me know. And you can also ask those questions through that email process that I just described. You see my email on the screen again, and my phone number here in Atlanta, which is in the Eastern Time Zone of the United States. So again, I appreciate your participation today. And if you have any questions or comments, come back to me. You can hear my voice that I'm pretty excited about opportunity management and the need to have some type of repetitive process that you can apply to qualify sales opportunities that you're pursuing. And I think hopefully I described something that will help you think about those 3 compelling questions. Should we pursue? Can we compete? Can we win? Those are the 3 compelling questions. I talked about the 9 criteria within those 3 compelling questions. Again, look at that process and internalize it and apply it, and I think you'll have a level of success. Thank you again for coming today and participating. And again, you have my contact information if you want to get in touch. Thank you so much. And again, have a great day. Stay safe out there these days.